Hey guys, and welcome back to another Letterboxd recap. Today I'm going to go over everything that I watched in the month of August, and I did not do one for July, and I still had people asking. There's a guy I just made eye contact with as he walked by. That's very awkward every time. Anyway, I still have people asking for what I watched in July. You can always follow me on Letterboxd. I'll have it linked down below, and you can see, in real time what I'm watching and what I'm rating what I'm watching. I always give things ratings. But back in July, I started up doing my individual reviews again, so I ended up talking about a lot of things independently, and then I watched a lot of non-horror as well, so I ended up with one movie that I would have talked about in depth in that video, so I just thought it wasn't worth it. But today we will be talking about that one movie because it is The Empty Man, and I have been asked so many times my thoughts on that, so we will start with that in today's video. In August, it seemed that I watched a lot of thrillers, so there's a lot more thrillers, I'd say, than horrors, and I was feeling so nostalgic in August. I don't know what it was. I was just having a wave of nostalgia where all I could listen to was 2000s music, all that I could watch was 2000s movies. So let's start with The Empty Man. This is a 2020 movie based on a graphic novel of the same name, and this follows an ex-cop on the trail of a missing girl when he stumbles upon a secret group attempting to summon a supernatural entity. Now, I've heard a lot of hype about this movie. I've seen it talked about a lot on, social media and whatnot, and so I was kind of expecting a certain kind of movie, and it definitely was not what I expected. And this movie actually did pretty poorly among critics and at screenings when it first was announced and released, but since its home release, it's gained quite a cult following, pun intended. And I can see both sides. I can see why on a technical level it wasn't really received well by critics, but I can also see why a lot of horror fans really love this movie. Personally, I think I gave this 3.5 stars out of 5. It was pretty decent. I actually really enjoy— oh my god, my cat's eating my sandwich. Pepe, you can't leave your food out when you have a cat with diabetes who wants to eat everything in the world. So I did find The Empty Man really enjoyable. I really loved how it started, and I was like, okay, this is very impressive. But I did feel that the ending gets a little bit too convoluted for itself, and it doesn't really know how to properly tie up all those strings. It just gets a little bit too complex, and I wish we had more of the intro. Like, I wish we just had a full-length movie about the intro. That was really cool. Love the concept. I just think it got a little bit too complex. Not that I didn't understand what was going on, but I felt the way that they executed the explanation and the ending just wasn't as satisfying as I would want. But it was entertaining. It was kind of satisfying, and I would still definitely recommend it, and I still really liked it. Would definitely rewatch it. Next, I watched The Green Knight. I'm not really going to talk about that much. I was pleasantly surprised by The Green Knight. I did have high hopes, actually. It did end up being a little bit strange, but I absolutely was obsessed with the visuals, specifically the giants. I loved it. I loved the visuals of this movie. It's obviously a very beautiful movie. I do feel the story is very lacking, and it was a very shallow story, and they really could have pushed it further. They could have gone more in depth, so it was a tad disappointing, but overall it was fine. I think I gave it 3 stars. Then I watched Mockingjay Part 1 and 2. I just finished rereading and rewatching for that matter, rereading the Hunger Games trilogy and watching all the movies as I finished them to prepare to read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I will start today, actually. I have very low expectations because it's a prequel. It's done years later. I've heard bad things, so it's fine. But I'm obsessed with The Hunger Games. In case you didn't know, it's one of my favorite movie series of all time, and book series. I love rereading those books. They're just so good. Next, I watched Don't Tell a Soul, another 2020 movie. This thriller film follows a security officer who falls in a hole in the woods while chasing 2 teenage brothers after they stole from an elderly woman. He then tries pleading for his life, trying to get one of the brothers to rescue him. So this movie is a thriller movie. There's no real horror elements or anything. A true thriller, almost leaning a little on the drama side, but this movie was actually very entertaining, highly impressive. I think this movie was really effective in the twists and turns that it took. It genuinely caught me by surprise, and I could never predict where the movie was going to go. So it really was an entertaining watch. And I think the story is really interesting. What are we doing? I think the story is really interesting and how it plays out is really interesting, and I'm not sure if it's like super unique or original, but I love the concept and how it was executed. This stars Jack Dylan Grazer with, I don't know why his name is so hard for me to say, Jack Dylan Grazer. I can't say that really fast, so sorry about that. We'd recognize him from It, of course, and also Rainn Wilson, which is, of course, from The Office, which I've never seen in my entire life, and I have no interest in it. And yes, I do recognize that that is a very pretentious and hipster thing to say, because everyone is obsessed with The Office. I've just never been interested in it, and no, I don't think I'm better than people. This movie also has Mina Suvari in it, so I think it's a pretty solid cast, and really well casted as well, and I feel like that really adds to the performances and the way that the story unfolds. I think the actors really sell it. So I would highly recommend this movie. I saw about it on TikTok, and I'm so glad that I saw this recommendation because I'm not sure if I would have found it otherwise. So I am now passing that along to you, and definitely recommend watching Don't Tell a Soul. Then I watched Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 2, finally finished the Harry Potter marathon that I started back probably in January, February, I'm not really sure. Now we're moving on to Fantastic Beasts. So yeah, but because it's fall, I am going to be restarting my Harry Potter marathon. I have to do that at least once a year, and typically I go in the fall time because every year I do my Halloween theme in my house as Harry Potter. So naturally I have to then rewatch all the Harry Potter movies. You probably don't care, but yeah. Okay, then I watched Shook, which is a brand new movie that is a Shudder original. And this follows Mia, who is a social media star who becomes the target of an online terror campaign, and she has to solve a game to survive. This is like Saw meets Home Invasion meets influencers. Like if influencers were forced to play the game of Saw, but also in their own home and perform tasks that they're told, but it's kind of home invasion-y. That's what you get out of Shook. It's very cheesy. It is a very cheesy movie, and I actually really love all the Shudder original cheesy movies that are happening, that are like very topical and appropriate for today's climate. You know, anything, you know, talking about the pandemic or influencers. I just watched another one that was kind of around influencers, so I think they're very, very entertaining. And personally, in Shook, I really like the beginning of this movie. It's very cheesy, so as long as you're expecting that, I think you'll get a lot out of this movie and you'll be highly entertained by it. I was personally very surprised by where the story ended up going. Like, again, it was a movie I could not predict, which is great. We love to see it. And this is rated pretty bad on IMDb. It currently holds a 4.2 rating. I don't personally care about that. I saw like a tip online that said, or someone who said something, I can't remember where I saw it, but they always have to add a point to the IMDb ratings, and that's more accurate to what they would personally believe, and I kind of agree with that because IMDb ratings can be harsh. But that's all to say that some of you will hate this movie. I think a lot of you will get a lot of enjoyment out of it and a lot of entertainment like I did. Next, I rewatched Cube. Great movie. Don't need to go into it. Maybe I'll watch the trilogy and do a video on all three one day, and also compare it to the Japanese remake that's coming out soon. Then I also rewatched Wolf Creek, which was a great rewatch. I love Wolf Creek. I think it's great. I think it's a really good movie that pushes the boundaries and is disturbing without crossing a line, which they easily could have with this movie, and they didn't, and they don't, and I love it. Obviously based on a true story, although the actual events that take place in the movie are not accurate to what actually happens, but highly recommend Wolf Creek if you have not seen it yet. I think it came out in 2005 or something like that. Some early 2000s vibes going on. Then I watched The Night House, which I did a full review on. I will link up here if you're interested to hear my in-depth thoughts. And then we watched my favorite movie of the month, Cry Wolf, from 2005. How have I not seen this before? I have seen so many of you recommend this movie to me, and I am kicking myself because I did not listen sooner. I don't know what came over me to watch it now, but I'm so angry that I didn't watch it sooner because this has now become one of my favorite Halloween movies. Also, I went and immediately bought it on DVD right after I saw it. So that's saying a lot. So Cry Wolf follows a group of prep school students who begin spreading rumors around the school that there's a masked killer called the Wolf after a student is found murdered. This is the ultimate teen horror, early 2000s Halloween goodness. I don't think it could be more me if it tried. Like, if you like all three of those things, if you're like me and you're obsessed with teen horror from the early 2000s, and it just happens to take place on the best holiday of the year, Halloween, well, it takes place around Halloween. What are you doing? You need to watch Cry Wolf. And then because of the early 2000s nostalgia kick that I was on, I watched Swim Fan, which is a drama thriller. It's kind of like a romantic thriller, Fatal Attraction kind of situation, but I really liked it. The vibes were just immaculate, and so the soundtrack, just everything about it is just so early 2000s nostalgia for me, so that's so good. I really, really liked it. And then for the first time ever, you're probably not gonna believe this, I watched X-Men, the first one, from 99/2000, I'm not really sure which year. But let me tell you, love it. Absolutely love it. I don't like Marvel movies. I went and saw Black Widow. Why did I do that? I don't know. Actually, I do know. My partner's favorite villain is Taskmaster, and then we went and saw Black Widow and walked away very upset. If you have seen that, you know why. So typically not a fan of Marvel. Sometimes dabble in the DC. Like, I love Joker. I like The Dark Knight. You know, I like some DC movies. I'm just not like a comic book person personally, so I wasn't really ever interested in the franchise, but I finally saw the first X-Men, and now I'm going to watch the first three, you know, up to 3, because I've heard that those are all done by the same people and have the same actors in it. So yeah, not sure why it took me so long, but I'm on the bandwagon now. Don't care about modern Marvel at all, so don't get your hopes up. Now, we're gonna move into my thoughts on Don't Breathe 2. I was gonna do a dedicated video to this, but I don't think it deserves it, although I could have ranted for 20 minutes about it, and I did to some people. I've just been so negative lately, but we're gonna do another rant, I guess, just a brief one for this video. Don't Breathe 2, why was this made? Who approved this? Who came up with this idea? Actually, I know who came up with this idea, the director, because he likes to push the limits, right? He likes to say that you can, in film, explore controversial topics. I think that's how he phrased it. When I saw the announcement for this movie and the trailer for this movie, I was very confused, because I was like, isn't that the rapist? Isn't that the man, spoiler for Don't Breathe 1, isn't that the man that abducted women and inseminated them to reproduce? Why does he look like, in this trailer, I don't know, maybe it's not accurate, but why is it in this trailer he looks like the protagonist? Why is it that it looks like we're now rooting for him and there are enemies that, what's going on? Why should I care about this man and root for him? Now, I don't believe that that's actually the intention of the sequel, and I don't believe that that's the intention of the director with the story of following the blind man with this orphan girl, protecting her. I don't think we're meant to root for him. I think we're meant to root for the girl, obviously. I'm, you know, can use critical thinking and understand that this movie is just full of anti-heroes and people that we're not meant to root for. Like, it's just not one of those that you're gonna pick a side because they're all bad. But even given that, I don't think this movie was great at all. I've seen a lot of people say they like it more than the first. I'm not sure how. I'm kind of in the minority of not really enjoying the first as much. So I just thought the original was average, and when I saw the announcement for this, I definitely was not excited about it. And if this weren't what I do for a living, and if I weren't expected to really talk about new releases like this, I probably would not have seen it. And I kind of wish I didn't, to be honest, because it is what you think it is. You know, it's just, there's no one to root for, really. The girl, I guess, but there's just no character development there. Or I don't know. It's for some people. It's not for me. I've seen a lot of people enjoy this movie, and if so, that is great. I'm so happy that you got something out of that movie that I didn't. I'm not gonna say that it's like the worst movie I've ever seen in theaters or anything like that, or I was having a miserable time. I was curious about where it was gonna go because there were so many twists and turns that, again, could not predict it. And I like when movies do that, when they're creative enough so I don't know, I don't see anything coming. The pacing's really good, so like it wasn't dull at any point. But I was confused throughout it why this man, they even address it in the movie, which was very just like a throwaway line of addressing of how shitty of a person this man is. It's just bizarre. I'm not sure why this was made. I'm just not a fan of the story arc or the villain or anything like that. So not for me. Not a huge fan. I think I gave it 2 stars, and that's being generous for me personally. And that's only because the story and where it went wasn't predictable. So that's not saying much. Moving on, I watched The Final Girls. This was actually a rewatch for me, and it's one of those where I forgot that I had seen it until I put it on, and I was like, oh yeah. And this is a really fun movie to just pop on like during the day. It's a meta horror comedy, very light on the horror. This follows a young girl who is grieving the loss of her mother, who was an actress, when a fire breaks out at a theater at a screening of her mother's movie, and in order to save her friends, they actually have to enter the film themselves and apply their knowledge of horror tropes. This is like if Scream met Friday the 13th. This stars Taissa Farmiga, which I am not always a fan of her roles. I just don't find her believable in a lot of the roles that she plays, and I don't like her cast in a lot of roles. I feel like she has a very specific acting style for specific roles, and I think she was great in American Horror Story. I really liked pretty much all of her characters in that, but beyond American Horror Story, I haven't found something that I'm like really excited about her being in. Like this one, I don't really get the chemistry between her and her supposed-to-be mom. I don't see the resemblance at all. They just feel like, I don't know. And obviously with the plot of the movie, it makes sense why they don't have that mother-daughter chemistry, but I just don't see it happening at all. I don't like her character in The Bling Ring. I don't really like her in The Nun. So I'm not sure if I'm the biggest Taissa Farmiga fan. I thought I was, but just in American Horror Story. I don't want to typecast her or, you know, limit her, but that's just my little thoughts on Taissa. Anyway, but The Final Girls, campy meta horror movie that's not very horror at all. It's definitely more on the camp, on the comedy. I would argue that this is more of just like a darkish-ish comedy movie and not really a horror at all. It is in the sense that they reference a lot of horror tropes, which is entertaining if you're a fan of the genre, but it's fun. It's fine. It's good. It's just, I have to be in the right mood for like a horror comedy like this. Next, I watched Candyman, the first original one, right before I went to see Candyman, the new one, which I will link my full review and thoughts on up here if you're interested. And then lastly, for the month of August, I watched Jezebelle from 2014. So this is a great example of how bad my memory actually is and how I manage to do this as for a living. It blows my mind every time. Like, my memory is just so terrible. I put this movie on thinking I'd never seen it, right? I was about halfway through and my partner comes home from work. He sees what I'm watching and he's like, oh, didn't we watch this? I was halfway through not remembering a thing. I had no recollection, to the point where I thought he was messing with me. I was like, absolutely not. We did not see this. He's like, no, we saw this. And then he like told me the plot of the story of what was going to happen next, and it did. And I was like, oh. But I did believe him. I believed that I did see it because at a certain point things did begin to fall into place and become a little bit familiar. Anyway, let's just talk about the movie though. So this follows a young woman who returns to her childhood home with her estranged father after an accident that leaves her wheelchair bound. There she encounters a spirit that won't let her leave. This movie was actually pretty good. I really enjoyed it, although the fact that I forgot it means it wasn't too memorable for me, which, you know, I'm just very bad with remembering things. So that's just me. My partner obviously remembered it, so. But I actually really enjoyed the story of Jezebelle. I think it's really original, and I was kind of going into it thinking it would be like a traditional haunted house story, and it definitely was unique and not what I expected in a really good way. It's not a perfect movie by any means, but it is one that will entertain you. It's not super artistic or anything like that, or really deep. You know, it's pretty straightforward. I gave it 3 stars, so I do recommend checking it out. There you have everything that I watched in the month of August. Now we're in September, which is technically Halloween time for me. I do have a special video planned for 31 movie recommendations for the month of October, or at least if you want to start your spooky marathon sooner, I will have that up in September. So look forward to that. Personally, I will be watching a lot of those movies on that list and rewatching them for the Halloween season. So you'll probably see in the next 2 months of my Letterboxd recaps a lot of Halloween movies. So be prepared for me to talk about them a lot. If you have any recommendations for movies that I should watch in the month of September and October for Halloween, or just for fall times. Please leave a comment down below, or if there's a movie that you are dying for me to talk about in one of these videos that you really want me to watch, leave it in a comment. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.